It is my privilege and pleasure to welcome back to the Freedom Conference stage, 1 year after they received the award, Kaylee McGee-White and George Bogdan, as well as Linda Davis, who is an incredible leader in her own right, but we also know her as a mentor to all the Tony Blankley Fellows, the widow of Tony Blankley, and such a great supporter of the Steamboat Institute. So please join me in welcoming back Kaylee, George, and Linda.
Well, it's great to be with you guys all tonight. George and I have benefited so much from the Tony Blankley Fellowship, and it is such an honor to have been last year's recipients and to pass the torch to this year's recipient, whom I'm very thankful to call a dear friend of mine as well. So George is going to introduce.
I just thought I'd speak a little bit first about what I've always really cherished about this experience, which is that it perpetuates the memory of a great man, Tony Blankley. And it was, just over a year ago, thank you. It was just over a year ago that I found out that I was going to receive this remarkable fellowship, and I thought about, what I wanted to describe to the audience about what I thought was so important about his legacy. And, I think when you look back at his life's work and his thoughts as captured in important books like American Grit and The West's Last Chance, Tony Blankley predicted many of the debates that we're having today, and his story lives on, and I think the Campus Liberty Tour and other programs that Steamboat puts on to kind of bring forward the desire in our society for open-minded and free debate.
Yes, please. And with that, it is our honor to present this year's Tony Blankley Fellowship Award to Brad Polumbo. Brad is an independent journalist and political commentator. He advocates for capitalism and free speech, and he creates social media content that reaches millions across YouTube and Instagram every single month, and he's been published across a variety of publications. And I've had the pleasure of calling Brad my friend for the past 5 years. We started our careers together at the Washington Examiner, right out of college, coming from two very different backgrounds. I'm sure he'll tell you this, but he graduated from UMass Amherst, and that is a college filled with perhaps the most unpleasant leftist people this country has to offer. I graduated from Hillsdale, where leftism is just the butt of every joke, so yes. And in the years since, we've both been working to try and convince the country that our generation, Gen Z, isn't made up of only raging, blue-haired they-thems. And believe me, our peers do not make this task easy. But Brad is fearless in his efforts to defend conservative values, including free speech, small government, and a public square that leaves room for men and women from all walks of life. And for as long as I've known him, Brad has been deeply committed to these principles and is not afraid to apply them to both the left and the right, even if doing so ticks off a whole lot of people. This is not to say he's unwilling to change his mind. In fact, if he spends enough time in Colorado, I bet we can finally get him to agree that marijuana legalization was a bad idea. But he will always advocate for what he believes is right for the country, just as Tony Blankley did, and just as the Steamboat Institute does every day. So I'm thrilled to welcome him to this fellowship program and to the Steamboat Institute.
It's my honor to take just a few minutes. One, I want to thank Mary for that incredible, inspirational singing both this morning and tonight. I said one of the greatest honors for me when I was in the Army, which my dear husband Tony supported wholeheartedly, was every morning and every evening be able to stand and watch that flag raised and lowered, and to hear that songs. That same feeling is there, and it's there in Steamboat. We are not going to let that flag be prevented from being raised ever, ever, ever. And one of the ways we do this, thank you. One of the ways we do this is with the Steamboat Institute and the ability to have the next generation come along and fearlessly speak about freedom and the principles that Tony espoused. I was honored and so touched to have the ambassador tell me about his first meeting with Tony over lunch in Washington, D.C. in 2002, when he had lunch with Tony, and you will all get this, oysters, a martini. He was wearing a pink suit. Right? Our Tony. So Tony used to come to the Institute when he was helping Jennifer and Rick, and we all get started. And he would wear his green shoes up on stage, right? So every year, our fellows, our Blankley Fellows, get a pair of shoes. And I noticed nobody's wearing theirs, but, whoa. Next year, I want to see them all in the back of the closet. Tom, I bet you still have yours. So, Brad, to be fully initiated, this was hard because you are the largest size we've ever had. Size 14. But Tony would love these purple shoes. And I hope you do too. And thank you. We look forward to great things from you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you all. Thanks for being here. You know, it's an unlikely path that took me here today to be before you, because as Kaylee mentioned, I didn't just go to a leftist university. I actually went to the only openly self-avowed Marxist school of economics in the continental United States. Now, before you give me the stink eye, I mostly did it by accident. I grew up in Massachusetts, graduated from high school from there, and I just wanted to know, all right, what's the most affordable, somewhat high-quality public college out there? And it's, okay, UMass Amherst. Little did I know, it also happens to be a self-avowed, self-described Marxist school of economics. And I did not know this going in because I just signed up for economics because I wanted to do social science and it sounded slightly more employable than gender studies. But I was in for quite the awakening once classes got going. One of the most prominent professors of economics there was actually the policy advisor for Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign. Another professor taught an entire semester about the Soviet Union without using the word gulag once. Another professor, and this one isn't a big deal, but it really just sticks with me, described the New York Times as a right-wing newspaper. And finally, my personal favorite, one of my professors was the editor of an academic journal that self-describes as a queer Marxist feminist journal of radical thought. In case you're looking for any beach reading. So you get the idea. Through every step of my college education, entrepreneurs and private enterprise were vilified. At best, they were described as some sort of necessary evil, and at worst, they were described as something that should be replaced by the state and is the root cause of most of society's problems due to their greed. Meanwhile, the government was portrayed as a benevolent force that always acts in the public interest, has no agenda of its own, and never fails to fix a market when it intervenes. Now, many of my peers seemed to essentially uncritically embrace this, some with the true zeal of a convert, but many others just because it was the path of least resistance to get an A, and they were already looking forward to the frats that weekend. I was never one to go along to get along, or to go with the flow, not from a very, very early age. I knew there had to be something else out there, something they weren't talking about, something they weren't teaching us about, so I went out and sought out conservative, free market approaches to economics, including the works of Thomas Sowell, Milton Friedman, and many others. Yeah, always applaud for Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell. And I discovered a few things that had been left out of my economics courses, quite conspicuously. One, honestly, the thing that stunned me the most is called the hockey stick of human history. The fact that for thousands and thousands of years, human living standards were essentially stagnant. They were essentially flat. But then, several centuries ago, after the advent and spread of capitalism and free trade, we saw an exponential increase in income per person, forming the shape of a hockey stick. Now, that is supposed to be an Econ 101 concept, but it was left out of my entire undergraduate education in economics. In the same way, I learned about the failures of socialism and communism in the 20th century and the truly horrific death toll and economic devastation that they brought about, which too, for some reason, were left out of the class about the Soviet Union. Now, I knew that I had to speak out about some of these things, and I started doing so on campus, both in class and through the college newspaper, where I became a columnist. And it will shock you to learn that it was not smooth sailing for me. So the columns were published on Facebook and shared around there, and every time one was published, the hashtag Brad is bad would trend locally on Facebook because everyone would get up in arms. And they even actually, former editors and alumni of the university signed an open letter petitioning the newspaper to get rid of me, which they eventually did. I even received, on multiple occasions, genuine death threats for advocating what were honestly very milquetoast, center-right ideas, like maybe we shouldn't have a free speech zone. Maybe the whole campus should be a free speech zone. But I was struck by the fact that after one of these classroom debates where I was going 20 versus 1 with the professor, 3 TAs, and 15 students with blue hair, they would come up to me, 1 or 2 people from that class, and say, "Thank you so much for speaking out. I totally agree with you." Part of me was like, dude, I could have used some backup in there. But the other part of me understood that I was studying in a repressive environment where people didn't feel free to speak their mind. But I wanted none of it. I got a taste for the intellectual combat, for espousing what I believe and making the case for it, and I've been able to make that my life's work so far through the first few years of my career. But what I didn't know then, that I do know now, is that that is also the work that Tony Blankley did. He not only advocated for the things he believed in, the founding principles of America, but he also did so with a civility and a respect that is unfortunately out of fashion in today's politics. I was struck looking back at his appearances on Left, Right, and Center and on the McLaughlin Group about how he could sit across from somebody with totally opposite values and hash it out, and that at the end of the day still see them for the person that they are and still treat them with respect and dignity, and not fall into the poisonous, toxic ad hominem politics we see so often today. That is the approach that I want to take in my career, and I'm confident that I will be able to take thanks to the Tony Blankley Fellowship and thanks to the Steamboat Institute. Thank you all so much.